and welcome back to the BCR Dawson sub. Let's have a look at what was accomplished during the month of March of 2023. The helix and its canopy have been installed, and I'm now working on the last 3 sections of the layout to go in, so we're getting closer to structural completion. The last step in hiding the Fort St. John subdivision trackage, which runs behind the Pine River section, was to cut access panels, which will stay in place, yet be easy to remove and replace. Here are the openings after they were cut. My friend John suggested using magnets and steel plates to keep the panels in place. Here we are gluing and clamping steel plates to the rear of the access openings, and this was done with 5-minute epoxy. John also suggested overlapping the panels with thin styrene to cover the surrounding joints. This eliminates the gap which would have been around the perimeter of these openings. When painted blue, they should become significantly less apparent to the eye. And here they are after painting them blue. They're actually a slightly different shade than the backdrop, but when I repaint the backdrop the same color, they will be less apparent. And when the backdrop is fully painted with clouds and etc., I think the panels will be even less noticeable. Let's take a closer look at those access panels in the backdrop for the Pine River section. These are cut from plywood and they're overlaid with a thin sheet of styrene. This was suggested by my friend John, and we wanted something that would minimize the impact on the backdrop, but would also be easy to remove and replace. So with steel plates at the back and magnets at the rear of these panels, they're held in place with magnets. So to remove them, I simply grab the edge and pull away. There's the hidden trackage for the Fort St. John subdivision. And then to replace them, we just put them back in and they snap in. So a very elegant solution. I really have to commend my friend John for suggesting that. And these will be painted blue to match the backdrop, and then I think they'll be even less apparent than they are now. After installing most of the north wall benchwork last month, it was now time to install the helix. This is one of the largest and heaviest sections of the layout, and it connects to both decks. The first step was to attach the rear and side backdrops to the outside of the helix enclosure. With the helix installed and leveled, a supporting cleat was fastened underneath the rear wall of the helix enclosure. The shelf inside the helix enclosure that you see in the top left corner of this photograph is for the command station and the power supply. And here is the helix enclosure and the lighting canopy after installation. These sections complete the north wall benchwork. And here's another view of the helix enclosure and the lighting canopy as you walk into the layout room. We're going to add a supporting leg at the front right corner of the helix, and that's just to help take the weight of it at the front. You are looking at the fully installed benchwork for the north wall. These layout sections have all been installed, leveled, and secured. This process began in the corner with the Highway 97 section. We ran the Fort St. John subdivision across the rear, through the backdrop, along the wall, and then into the neighboring room. Next to the Highway 97 section is the Pine River section. This supports the Pine River Bridge, which is over 6 feet in length. This section of the layout is 8 feet long, and it's about 30 inches wide at the right end, hence the supporting leg at the front. Up above, we have the 2 sections for Tremblay. There was a passing siding here, and also an online grain elevator and fertilizer warehouse. Up above, we have the lighting canopy. And down at this end, we have the helix and its lighting canopy. The helix adjoins both decks. It is 6.5 turns, 2.3% grade, and 16-inch radius. On the front of the helix enclosure is a management panel for the power districts, of which there are 8. There's a ramp meter for displaying output voltage and current, and there's an occupancy panel to monitor trains going up and down the helix. On top of the helix, there is a cover, and this is just sitting loosely on here. It also has an access panel so that I can stand up and work in here if I have to. This area will be scenic, and it's going to be a large hay farm. The trains surface at the rear, they come around the back of this, and then they come into Tremblay. So it's been a great step forward to get these various layout sections back on the wall. And we are now only 2 sections away from structural completion. Much of the focus during March was on the Sundance bond section, which has required a fair amount of modification and repair work. This photograph was taken during excavation of the ballast pit at Sundance. I am removing the Donnacona down to the plywood underneath. This layout section needs to be cut down in length to fit across the new layout room. After I measured and marked the section, my friend John is cutting it with a handsaw. Approximately 20 inches was removed from the left side of this layout section. The end wall was salvaged and will be reinstalled as it already has all of the passage holes for wiring drilled through it. Here we see the Sundance bond section in place on the layout for a test fit with temporary supporting legs. During this test fit, I'm going to get the connecting tracks at either end cut and test fitted, and the section will then be removed and returned to the sawhorses so that I can complete the wiring and turnout controls while the section is on its back. And here we see the new trackage for Sundance, including the main track, the siding, and the turnout for the new ballast pit spur in the distance. The track bed for the new connections from Bond and Sundance to Chetwynd were laid. After this photograph was taken, strips of masking tape for super elevation were added underneath the outside rail. The track connections from Bond and Sundance to Chetwynd are seen here after cutting and attaching the feeding wires, and here they are in for a test fit. They're going to be installed after this layout section goes back in, and that's due to the insulated rail joiners at the left. Those do not slide back and forth, so I will have to install and glue down these 2 sections of track once the layout section is back in place. This photograph shows the sub-road bed for the new ballast pit spur. I transitioned from the foam track bed to cork and then to balsa sub-road bed so that I could more easily sand the ramp down into the pit. The track connection from Sundance to the Highway 97 section has been cut, the feeder wires have been added, and that piece of track has been glued down. And the track across the Highway 97 section for the Dawson Creek subdivision was also replaced at this time, as it was not faring well, and now seemed a good time to change it out and replace it. And the track for the ballast pit spur is seen here after it's been laid down, and this completes the track laying at Sundance. Let's take a look at the Sundance bond section. I've just finished all of the track laying, and before it comes out for wiring work, I thought we'd just take a look at how things stand so far. Over on the left, we have the connecting tracks from Sundance to Chetwynd and from Bond to Chetwynd. These have been installed temporarily with feeders dropped. I can't install them permanently just yet because of these insulated rail joiners. Those don't slide back and forth, so we'll have to put this layout section back in place permanently, and then these tracks can go down permanently. Over here we have the Sundance main track and siding in the front, the Bond siding and main track at the rear. They'll be separated by a scenic ridge, and in the front we have the ballast pit track at Sundance, which is a new addition. It comes off the main to the east of the siding. Here we have the connecting track from Sundance to the next section of layout. I've also replaced the section of track that goes over the highway overpass. That was in rough shape, and I thought now would be a good time to replace it. It is also not glued down permanently. The bridge will have to come out at some point for scenery work here. but it's in there for now. If we come to the front of the section, you can see that I've been removing signage and turnout controls from the front of the layout section, and there's now some repair work to do with filling holes and sanding and eventually repainting. So this layout section will now be removed, and I'm going to work underneath on the wiring, and then it'll be able to go back in permanently. We'll get those tracks down permanently, and then we'll be able to get to work installing the last two sections of the layout, which is the one above and the lighting canopy. So with track laying and a test fit complete, the section for Bond and Sundance was removed and returned to the sawhorses for completion of the wiring work underneath. You can see that the ability to place the layout section on its back makes the wiring work much easier. I can sit in a chair and work on it with the layout section in front of me. All of the new track feeders now have to be tied into the bus wires, and the servos, singlets, and frog juicers for the turnouts also need to be reinstalled. A new turnout for the gravel pit spur at Sundance required an additional servo, singlet, and frog juicer, which you see here in this photograph. I had enough spare parts on hand except for the brackets, so new ones had to be sourced. Unfortunately, the wood ones from Tam Valley are no longer available. My friend Alan had some made out of acrylic for his layout, and I was able to get a few to use here. Here is the underside of the Bond and Sundance section after completion of the track bus and auxiliary bus wiring. I elected to run a new track bus for Sundance due to the additional number of tie-ins that were required. The new alignment for Sundance ended up right on top of the track bus runs for Bond, so they had to be shifted over to make room for the servos for the turnouts. The servos nearest the camera are for the south switch at Bond and the west switch at Sundance. And this view is from the other end, with the servos for the east switch at Sundance, the gravel pit spur, and the north switch at Bond nearest the camera. Here's the section for Bond and Sundance. I've just completed all of the wiring for the new trackage at Sundance. All of the feeder wires have been tied into the bus wires. I actually ran a new pair of bus wires for Sundance. There were just too many new tie-ins required, and it was easier to run a new pair of wires, and that resulted in a neater installation. This end of the section is where we made the cut to fit the width of the new layout room. And here we have the bus wires for Chetwynd and the staging yard, which will continue on to the next section, as well as the auxiliary bus wires. I've left those long, and they'll be cut to length and prepared to join the terminal blocks on the other section once this is back in. Same for the command bus up here. I've installed the servos, singlets, and frog juicers for the 5 turnouts on this section, and they have been connected to each other. The bus wires for Septimus, which includes Bond, that had to be moved because it ended up right underneath the track alignment for Sundance, so I had to move those wires around to make room for the turnouts, and that left us a little short at the far end, so I had to put in a pair of extending wires to get us into the terminal block there. Here is the new servo, singlet, and frog juicer for the turnout into the gravel pit spur. That's in addition to the layout. You can see that those are on acrylic brackets, as well as the singlet down here. Those were sourced by my friend Alan Trammell, as the brackets from Tam Valley are no longer available. So I was very grateful to Alan for that, and they worked out quite well. Up here on the fascia, you can see that I have filled all of the holes from the previous control panels, and I will now need to prime and paint the fascia, and then I will install the new control panels. I have the new panels, I'm just waiting on the mounts that they go on, and then once those are in, I will need to run the wires from the toggle switches over to the singlets so that we can activate the turnouts from the fascia. So that's a big job completed, and once the control panels are done, then this section will be ready to go back in place permanently. So the next step will be to connect DC power and do a quick test run. This video was taken during testing of the Sundance trackage. I'm running a little fast just to get the engine through the turnouts because the frogs are not yet powered. We've brought a ballast train into the siding, and we're spotting a ballast hopper into the new gravel pit spur. So this test is to make sure that the trackage is working, that the polarity is correct, and that I haven't made any mistakes when I'm connecting all of the wiring. The last original section for the upper deck to be reinstalled is the Cascatenot section, which will feature the deck howe truss and framed trestle span across the Cascatenot River. I have a temporary span across the river at this point in time. This section also needs to be shortened to fit across the new layout room. This will require a realignment of the track, so all of it is going to have to be taken up and relayed. Underneath this section, we can see 2 track bus runs and the LED lighting for the lower deck below. This will need to be removed back past the cut line, and the new feeder wires will be tied in once the track is relayed. In this photograph, I am pointing to the approximate location of the cut line. At this point, the benchwork is only 6 inches wide, so the cut should be fairly straightforward. Everything to the left of where I'm pointing is going to be removed and discarded. And here we see the LED lighting and track bus runs removed back past the cut line, and the connections for the LED lighting have been restored. The track bus runs have been left long for connection to the neighboring section once this layout section is reinstalled. And the last original section of the layout to be reinstalled will be the lighting canopy above Cascatenot. It also needs to be shortened, but it only requires a few simple alterations. Here I am pointing to the cut line for the canopy. It's actually in the middle of one of the cross members there. The light bars to the left will have to be removed, and the auxiliary bus run will have to be brought back past the cut line. And here's another view after removing the light bars and restoring the connections on the other side of the cut line. The auxiliary bus run, which is for the fast clock, has also been shortened and the connection restored. Well, that is it for this month. During April, work will continue to get the last sections ready for reinstallation, and I'm looking forward very much to seeing the layout structurally complete once again. I would like to thank my friends Michael, Mark, Alan, and John, who helped with various aspects of the work this month. Thank you for watching, and I hope to be back with another update next month. Until then, peace be with you.